Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson, the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and thank you for joining us today for our Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. We're going to be hearing from Mr. Bert Romberg, who will be sharing his experiences growing up in Germany, his escape to England on the Kindertransport, which was a rescue mission that allowed thousands of Jewish children from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia to live with private citizens in England. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Spring Break Survivor Series. That would be the Dallas Mavericks, the Legacy Senior Communities, and I know we have an entire row of senior community folks. SMU, hey, settle down. SMU Human Rights Program, Southwest Jewish Congress. We're grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. We couldn't do this without you. We would also like to extend a special welcome to our board members, our members, and our volunteers in the audience. We couldn't fulfill our mission without your help. If you are interested in becoming a museum member or volunteer, please visit our website, dhhrm.org, to learn more, or you can stop at the front desk on your way out today because they can help you as well to become members. In just a moment, Bert will share his story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers. If you're joining us in person today, you received an index card and a golf pencil when you walked in, so please write out your question on that, and we will have staff members going around when Bert is done speaking to pick those up from you. If you're joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your questions, and we will get to as many of those as we can. I would also like to ask you to silence your cell phones so that we may all listen to Bert's story without ringing and begin the begin and all of the other ringtones that people have. So please also refrain from recording the presentation. We are actually recording it. It will be available on our YouTube channel probably by the end of the week, so you'll be able to watch it that way as well. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Romberg to the podium.
Good day. I don't think we'll need this, but if anybody isn't hearing me clearly, put up your hands. In any event, we have about an hour to spend together, and I have 3 or 4 hours worth of work for you to do. It's not easy to put 15 years of one's life into an hour, less than an hour, but we'll try. Let's start with some important dates. Many of them are families' dates, others are generally important dates worldwide. 1927, our parents married. 1929, Sister Maggie was born. 2 months later, our grandfather, the patriarch, on our mother's side, died. 1929, 1930, I was born. 1932, and a democratic election in Germany ended with a virtual tie, with the largest vote going to the Nazi Party, but not the majority. So it was a tied election. In the Weimar Republic's bylaws or constitution, it said that the chancellor can be nominated by the president. In other words, they had a president and a chancellor, like Israel has a president and has a president and a prime minister. So the chancellor is the equivalent of prime minister. And he can be nominated by the president, with the legislature having a 60-day period to yay or nay on that nomination. The president was von Hindenburg, an old, aged general, who was persuaded by industrialists and the military community to nominate Adolf Hitler. right thereafter, the Reichstag was bombed. A fire was set in the Reichstag, which is the parliament building. Hitler used that as an excuse to ask for absolute power, called the Enabling Act. And the Reichstag, the assembly, gave him that power. So that 60 days ended right there, and he assumed absolute power. And as you now know, instead of him being on the hook for 60 days, he was a dictator from 1933, early 1933, till 1945, a period that probably cost 60 million lives worldwide. In any event, important dates. Shortly after, he became the chancellor, the equivalent of our president. Two regulations, they weren't brought into law, but they were enforced by the Nazi Party. The first was, the Jews have always been the enemies of the German people, and you have 400 to 500,000 of them living amongst you, and they are your traitors. We must shun them. So don't do business with them if you have to. Pay them as little as possible. If you can get away with it and you owe them money, don't repay them. And we, the German government, which now is the Nazi Party, will see to it that nobody, not a policeman, not a prosecutor, not a jury, not a judge, will take a case against you. Right there, 400,000 Jewish German citizens lost their civil status. And the second of the regulations was very simple. No Jewish child will attend a public school. So the next date, this was in 1933, the next date, late 1933, early 1934, Maggie and my father died. And my mother was now left to take care of two snot-nosed kids and her widowed mother. But even more than that, she was the last of 4 siblings to stay at home. And so that building the business that my grandfather built, which was in this building on the bottom right, which was our business as well as our home, became her responsibility. And in an ever increasingly nasty Nazi society, she was beginning to, she was presiding now over a losing business because she couldn't collect her debts. Now, let's go back a little bit. This is a crude sort of roadmap that the museum here constructed out of northeastern Germany and Great Britain. And the blue line is roughly the journey that our little family took in the next 15 years, put it that way. Astheim is the little place where we were born, a agricultural community nestled in the armpit of the junction of the Rhine, the major north-south river in Germany, and the Main, the major east-west river. And it was very, very prosperous farming community. They raised everything from grapes to goats. And my grandfather built a business that you would today call a farm and ranch operation. But it quickly went downhill when the Nazis came to power, because they either counseled against doing business with Jews or actually brutally retaliated against people who did business with Jews. So came 1934, 1935, the business quickly went down, and she was forced to make a decision. So she sold our property there and moved us, grandmother and Maggie and I, to Eschwege, which is about 60 miles north of Astheim. It's a rather larger town, a market city, where her next oldest sister had moved to raise their family. And we were there in 1936, 37, 38. And she was right in two of her calculations. One, it had a Jewish community large enough to have its own school, so she could look forward to some education for her children. And she thought it would be more metropolitan and wouldn't be singled out as the only or one of the very few Jewish families in town, so that she wouldn't have to bear the total brunt of the Nazi ideology. She was right on both counts for a couple of years. And then in 37 and 38, things began to change very quickly. I will show you, or I can show you, a list. This is page 59 of a list of a census of Jews in Germany. And page 59 is one of the pages in Eschwege where we lived. And we were registered. And on October 1, 1987, you see these three lines? It's my mother, my sister, and 7-year-old Bert Romberg, giving our sex, giving our ages, giving where we came from, and where we now live. Why I'm pointing that out, and I'm going to do this more frequently, some parallels with things that are happening in our society and in our world today. You will recall early in the 2016 election, one of the candidates said, "The Muslims hate us. Many of them live among us, and a lot of them are coming in, but they hate us. We should register them." That's what a list looks like. This list was used 1 year later to the date, in November 1938. That list was 1937, was Kristallnacht, where the Germans, goaded by the central government and the Nazi Party, plundered, robbed, and destroyed property from Jews in every village, town, city, community in the country. And it's Kristallnacht because the streets were littered with glass, and the crystal signifies crinkling. And the worst part of that event was that tens of thousands of Jewish men, 18 years and older, were taken to the first of the concentration camps. And the world heard for the first time names like Dachau, Buchenwald, Groß Rosen, beautiful names for places where people were beaten, humiliated, many of them killed. And the world was horrified. And the German Jewish community was terrified. And the world couldn't do or didn't do and wouldn't do very much because the world had its own problems. It was recession time. It was depression time. And nobody wanted refugees. Don't send us any refugees because they'll just take our jobs or whatever. We're in 1938, going on 1939, Kristallnacht. And a very lucky event happened. I didn't show you, I'll go back or I'll go forward, show you, this is our parents' wedding. In the gold ring is, of course, our mother and father. And in the corner, there's a little guy in the back, you hardly can see him. He made his way to England very, very early, in the early 30s, and became quite prosperous. He's a cousin of my mom, and he corresponded with her all the time that he was in England, and he managed to establish a visa. Most of you know what a visa is. Young lady, do you know what a visa is? It's not a credit card. Okay? A visa is permission from the government of one country to somebody who wants to move to that country, permission to come in. And usually it's very bureaucratic. It requires all kinds of paperwork and stuff. But our mother got a visa, and it looks like this, and it's dated February 27, 1939, the next very important date in our family history. And it reads like this. It's in English, of course, for the first time. It says, refugee to be admitted to the United Kingdom on condition that to be admitted to the United Kingdom on condition that she does not enter any employment other than as a resident in service in a private household. And it's addressed to Cedar Romberg, my mother, with my sister's name and my name down below. And it means that Mrs. Romberg, if you can come to the United Kingdom, but if you come, you're going to be a housemaid. Because we're not letting any refugees take real jobs. But you can clean our toilets, you can make our beds. For that, you can come in. And of course, it is a document that saved 3 lives. Now, coincident with this visa came the Kindertransport. Kindertransport is a rescue effort thought of by a small Christian sect, the Quakers, who allied with the Jewish charity, Jewish immigration charity, petitioned Parliament to let refugees come from Germany. And the reason was that they had sent a small delegation to Germany, 5 or 6 people, who were to report to them, is it really as bad as our newspapers and our radio are telling us? There was no television in those days. And this delegation came back and told their community or their congregations that the situation for Jews in Germany is dire, and we got to do something. So they, with the German Jewish charity, petitioned Parliament, and Parliament said, "You're crazy. Don't you realize this is a trade union country? And if we let refugees come in, they'll take jobs, and next election, we're out of here. So we can't let any refugees in." The story is very similar in other countries, but the Quakers persisted. And they came out with a small bargain, one of the few good results in this terrible event that this museum memorializes. They came out with a bargain. British government said you can bring in 10,000 Jewish kids, 15 and younger, because they're not going to take our jobs. But you, the Quakers, will see to it that any child you bring in will not become a burden on the United Kingdom's treasury. You will see to it that that child is housed, fed, clothed, and schooled at your expense, at no other expense to the government. And the Quakers and the charities, having no choice, took that bargain and began in early 1939, began placing trains at stations in Berlin, the capital of Germany, Frankfurt, the number 2 city, Vienna, the capital of Austria, and Prague, the capital of Czechoslovakia. 2 countries, Vienna. Austria had already been annexed to Germany, had its own Nazi party, more vicious even than the Germans. And Czechoslovakia was imminently being invaded or taken over by the Germans, by the Nazis. And those trains were ready and prepared to take children to the United Kingdom. And the Jewish population in these countries that heard about the Kindertransport, and Kindertransport is a German word for, Kind is a German word for child. Kinder is its plural, so it's children, and transport is motion, so it's the motion or the shipment of children. And beginning in 1939, 10,000 children came out of both of these 3 countries to Britain. We were not technically Kindertransport kids. We came out on mother's visa. But being restricted to only working in a household, what household is going to even accept her with 2 little kids? So she put us with the Kindertransport, and she got on the same train in the guise of chaperone, and there were other chaperones on these trains, but she was allowed to enter the United Kingdom because she had this very precious visa. So here we are. It is late June, July 1939. We arrive at Liverpool Street, London. We had traveled along that blue line that you see on the map through the Hook of Holland, which is the ferry terminal for the ferry to Harwich, the port that services London. And we were met by these Jewish charities, and I can show you some paperwork on that later on if you want to come up and look at it. And Maggie and I, we remember we were in some large hall which acted as a hostel for these kids temporarily while they were looking for, or while foster families were found to take care of us. And after a couple of days there, we were sent to Coventry, this city in the center of the English countryside, but it's a very important city because it was, and still is, the motor city, the equivalent of Detroit in England. And we are now in July, August, 1st of September, the Second World War breaks out, and Coventry is a major target for the Luftwaffe because they are now determined to destroy England's war material making effort, and Coventry is the place where much of that happens. So that brings on the next important date. And, well, I'll tell you a little bit about Coventry, because although this entire episode, I'm talking about the Second World War, is one of terrible cruelty, and the Jews in Europe were the ones that suffered the most. There were some very, very heartening, very humane efforts along the way. And of course, the one that we were most beholden to were the Quakers, but then the families that fostered us. I was fostered by two families, 3 years each, who were very, very good to me, embraced me, and took me in. Oh, the Shepherds, the first family in Coventry, they did things like this. They were people of very modest means. Mr. Shepherd was a postman, a letter carrier. Mrs. Shepherd was a bus driver's assistant. She was the ticket taker in a public transport bus. But they had two children. Peter was 2 years older than me, and Mary older than he, so they took over, and I was there, and Mary was assigned to teach me English because this dumb little kid from Germany didn't have a word of English. She's teaching me, and I remember very clearly the first English sentence I learned. They had a clock over their mantelpiece, over their fireplace, and they kept this clock 10 minutes fast, like I used to keep my car clock I had so I wouldn't be late for work. And she would stand me up in front of the fireplace and say, now remember, this clock is 10 minutes fast. She didn't realize that I knew how to time. I didn't know how to tell time in English. So she's teaching me in English. So anyway, it was the first sentence that I learned to put English words together and realize that you could do that, kind of that the English were also human beings. They were so kind to me. For instance, they would invite the neighbors' kids over to play with me. When the child would go to the countryside to visit his grandparents or her grandparents, they would ask to borrow a bicycle so I could learn to ride a bike. they started me with piano lessons, which was a huge mistake. It was totally. I cut the piano lessons. I don't know what I did with the money, but I went to 1 in 3 till they found out. But they did take care of me. And then the next family, which was the date for that was 1942. I got to the Shepherds in 1939. 1942, when Mama was in London in a household, and we hadn't seen her in 3 years, she realized that it was time to learn from my bar mitzvah. And Coventry, having been blitzed, where there was a major Jewish community, but the synagogue was destroyed. The rabbi was maybe in the army, the Hebrew teacher maybe in the Navy, and there was no organized Jewish education. So Mama went to the German Jewish Refugee Relief Society and asked if they could find a place for me to learn from my bar mitzvah. And they found a place with the Jewish orphanage station, which now is in Hartford. You see this town is marked Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire is actually a county, and Hartford is its capital. And there was the Jewish orphanage, a very prestigious Jewish institution with about 80 children evacuated from London to Hartford, where families are fostering them. Okay, so I was sent there and became an orphanage kid to learn from my bar mitzvah. Meantime, Maggie was still in Coventry with a Jewish family who also had 2 children about the same age as the Shepherds, but didn't treat her very well. Maggie got there when she was 10, had just turned 10. By the time she was 11 and a half, she was their housemaid. She was cleaning their toilets. She was doing their laundry. And though they had their own children who should have done a lot of this work, much of it was left to Maggie. But she stuck it out, and she was with them for 4.5 years. But they kept the bargain. They housed her, they fed her, they sent her to school, etc., etc. And she survived, and she just had her first great-grandchild. So there we are. So I'm now, this is my own story, I'm now with the orphanage. And the orphanage, having been evacuated from London, is under the jurisdiction of the London County Council School District, a very wealthy county that has scholarships, which they administer twice yearly when a child is eligible at 12 and at 15, and they call them the 12s and the 15s. And at 12, I was successful in getting a scholarship. And that admitted me to the Battersea Grammar School, which was a very prestigious London sort of private school. Actually, the first rung in the British university system. And it looked like this. Yeah, this is the front page of Battersea Grammar School's yearbook, the year after I left. And you see it has, where are the children here? I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You go to school. Does your school have a motto? You do have a motto? I bet you don't have a motto like this. This school's motto, you can read it there. It says, rather death than false of faith. You know what that means? It means if you lie, that's what it means. You should have such a motto. You really should. And also, do you have a school mascot? What is it?
A bear.
Huh?
A bear.
A bear. A bear. Look at this. Can you see the phoenix? Do you see it there? Not only that, we have a patron saint. This guy is St. John. See him with the lance? He slew the dragon. Can you compare that to a bear? Really? So this is what we did, and I'm talking now to the children, because this is the kind of thing I talk to the children. Battersea Grammar School, 13-year-old kid. Our curriculum, 8 to 5:30 daily and half day on Saturdays. And in any given week, we would learn 3 maths: algebra, geometry, trig. 3 sciences: chemistry, bio, physics. 3 English: written English, spoken English, and debate and history. And then we had 2 other histories, world history and British Empire history. And we had geography, and we had something like civics, and we had this all at the same time. Not 5 days a week of algebra, maybe 2 or 3 hours, but we learned. And when I came to America, I was not quite 15, and they put me in the middle of sophomore year at Jamaica High School. I was way ahead in almost all these subjects. Not so good in Spanish. American history I didn't know much about, but it stood me very, very well. And I'm telling you, kid, oh, there's a youngster. I'm telling you now, if somebody wants to teach you something, you sit up, you take notice, and you ask for more. Take doubles, second helpings, okay? You adults can do the same thing. It wouldn't hurt you. So that was at the same time. Mama was in London and severely blitzed. I think you probably have records or know about how badly London was bombed. But Coventry was the first city that was leveled. And then a second 2 years later, in 1942, again. And she was there. We didn't have a phone. We could communicate by postcard. And she's there not knowing what is happening to her 2 kids. But in 1943, when the British realized that they had so many of these refugees who had gotten out, who they had not allowed to work real jobs, they let them out. And Mama got a job as a sewing machine operator in a garment factory making uniforms. And it was the first time she made a decent salary and came by train to visit her little boy. 3 years. So let's back up a little bit. So I will show you a couple of interesting. Here's some of the things that happened in Germany, because these have parallels. You see this yellow form you have back there. You see that word Abmeldung? Ab is the German word for off, away, and Meldung is the German word for notice. So this is a notice of departure, and it's signed by the police and the mayor of Eschwege, and it's countersigned by my mother, Sarah Romberg. Now, why I'm showing it to you is because my mother never had the name Sarah. And my name shows there as Berthold Israel Romberg. And the Nazis told us, you Jews, you're going to get new names. If you are a female, your name is Sarah. If you're a 2-year-old little girl, or it's your Aunt Judy or your grandma, you're all Sarahs. And if you're a male, your little brother Benny and your uncle Jake and Robert down the street, you're all Israels. Can you imagine the temerity of this? And this was official and in all these documents. So little by little, the Nazis just stripped away our personalities. This was just the beginning. Eventually, it ended up, the worst of it was numbers. And when you're just a number, or when you're looked at as just a number, then the next stage of getting rid of you is very easy. It's just another little step. Okay? Just showing you some. Oh, this is the typical Kindertransport. Those are file photos. Kids have these numbers. The picture on your top left is probably the Hook of Holland with the rail station on the right side and the ship on the left side, and the kids are being led across to the ship, which you see on the right. And we know that's a rival in England because this guy with the funny hat, this big guy, is an English policeman, a bobby. Okay. Next, interesting, maybe. Oh, this is us in Eschwege after we had moved from it's not in Eschwege. The pictures at the bottom are us in our backyard in Germany, Maggie and I. And the picture above, I think, are our passport pictures. And then this is our mother in the courtyard of the apartment in Eschwege. Now, you take a look at me. I think it's me. I got this very nice cravat, I have a clean shirt. They probably cleaned out my ears. And the cravat means it's part of the uniform that the Germans at that time put on kids' first day in school. So this is probably my first day in kindergarten, and Maggie probably in first grade. So let's go forward. Okay. Here's the other reason why our mother got some money. She lived at a place called Basing Hill, which is in northwest London, that was blitzed. And the beautiful house where she was the servant was destroyed. And whatever goods or things she had were also destroyed. And the British government had a War Damage Act, see, in 1941, private chattels scheme, and it was meant to help compensate people who lost property to get them back on their feet because of the Blitz. And the British said, Mrs. Romberg, we already advanced you £9 10 shillings, and we assessed the amount of damage £54 17 shillings and sixpence. So we owe you £45 7 shillings and six. Now, the pound was worth somewhere between $5 and $6 at that time. So you're talking $250, which was more money than she made probably in 3 months in the household. She got this all at one time. And this afforded her to take that first trip to see us. So that's a document. Here's another document. This is a letter that Magie wrote, and it is dated 1941, April 1941, a year and a half, 2 years after we got to England. And you'll see it's perfect English. You will remember that America was not in the war till the end of 1941. Right, December 7th, Japan hit Pearl Harbor. So there was commerce between England and America. And the family, my mother's oldest sister, had already been in New York several years, and they sent us care packages. And Magie is in effect writing, thanking for the chocolates and asking for more. She had the chutzpah then that she still has. Okay. Next document. This is a somber document. British Red Cross. You see it there? Deutsches Rotes Cross. You see the black notification. It's the British Red Cross writing to us, telling us refugees, if you have family left in Europe and you think they're still there, we've arranged with German Red Cross to send them this note, and they'll try to find them if you'll put your next of kin or whoever's address. And they can write a note on the back, and it'll come back to you, and you'll know they're still alive and doing well. So Mama wrote this out in German. It's to her mother. Dear Mama, Paula, which is her older sister, Margot, which was my cousin, because they were all stuck in Germany still. Hope you are well. Gretel, which was my sister's nickname, Bertie, which was me, are well, and it goes well with them. The children go to school, and I'm working. Kisses, Sida. This is addressed to my mother, Katinka, to her mother, Katinka Rothschild, Frankfurt am Main in Germany. And it comes back, and we don't know the date, but it comes back, we think, in July, because she sent this in early June. She sent it on the 8th of June. So we think it came back in July or August. And it's in this very Germanic script that we had trouble getting even translated. And it's signed, and it says, I'm doing well. I don't quite, she didn't know where her other daughter, my aunt, or my mother's older sister is. But she's doing well, and she says, Küsses Mutter. Now we only think, we don't know, this could not have been my grandma's handwriting. To begin with, we never called her Mutter. We always called her Mama, Mama or Oma. We think this was ghosted for her, and the Germans just sent it back, hoping that, they would fool us. But some 18 months after this, we know she died in Poland. On a better note, I did have my bar mitzvah. These are somebody with very nice handwriting took the trouble to make an inventory. So I got a world atlas, I got a talus, I got a wallet. Mr. and Mrs. Bloom gave me 10 shillings. Mrs. Brenner gave me only 6 shillings. Somebody gave me a book token. Uncle Benno, the guy who gave us, or who posted the visa, gave me a wristwatch. Somebody gave me a dictionary, a Monopoly game, a pocket knife, £5. Oh, Uncle Jacob and Aunt Irene sent £5 from America. That's a lot of money for them. $25. Anyway, that was my bar mitzvah, July 1943. So then the Battersea Grammar School, what happened was I stayed with the orphanage for the last 3 years for my religious education and my upkeep, because the orphanage supervised my upkeep with the foster family and went daytimes to the Battersea Grammar School, all in Hartford. So it was a pretty healthy environment for me, and I did thrive there. And then going further, eventually we got the visa. The visa dated February 1939. It took some considerable paperwork to get an actual passage and everything, but the visa was in April 1945. We went from London through Coventry to Glasgow on a steamer to Halifax, Scotland. All the passage was paid for from Halifax by train to Montreal and then to New York. All the passage was paid for by a Jewish charity in London, with whom I am now corresponding. Anyway, that's the story. That's our personal story. I did want to give you some insights into where we're going with this, because last time I was speaking to a business group and gave this kind of a talk, and I had about 100 people in the audience and 25 people on Zoom, and somebody from Zoom said, "What should we take away from this discussion?" And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, in 1935, they burned books in Germany. In 20, 23, and 24, they banned books in Texas schools. I thought, think about that. Where do these things start? They start small this way. Somebody told us we should register Muslims. Told us that in 2016. And they registered Jews in 1938. There are all kinds of these precedents. And then I want you to think about, despite the war that started in 1939, killing 50 to 60 million people worldwide, 6 million of them Jews, 1.5 million of them children under 15. Think about this. Because of the Quakers, you kids, make a fraction. 10,000 of us got out. 1.5 million died in the next 6 years. That's a fraction of 10,000 over 1.5000000. Rationalize that fraction. Can't do it, huh? Takes too much time. I'll do it for you. It's 1 over 150. And it means for every child that got out, Magie Romberg, 150. Bert Romberg, 150 kids died in the next 6 years. Think about that. And there are all these parallels, stuff that's happening today on a world basis. Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia. Why? Because in northern Czechoslovakia there were Germans living. And his excuse for going to the rest of the world, he said, I got to go, I got to make sure these Germans are safe. It was his first incursion in the rest of Europe, and the world let him get away with it. Mr. Putin went to Crimea and then went into Ukraine and said, there are Russians living there, I've got to save them. Think about that. So we don't have time for any more. I'd love to hear your comments or your questions. Thank you. By the way, you're quite welcome to come and look at some of these documents. Okay?
Bert?
Yes.
We'll do question and answer, and then when we're done,
Yeah.
we'll give people a chance to answer questions that they've given us online.
Okay.
And we're collecting now from the audience, and then when we're done, people can come up and talk to you.
Okay. Yes.
Alrighty, so I'm going to start asking questions that we've gotten. The first question is, do you remember your journey to the United States, and could you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I remember it very well. Firstly, because there was very little civilian traffic across the Atlantic, the Jewish agency got steerage passage for us on a British luxury liner that was ferrying Canadian troops back and forth across the Atlantic. That's the reason we went from Scotland to Halifax, and then on a train to Montreal. And I remember we changed trains in Montreal, and on the platform in Montreal were a bunch of Jewish women, probably Hadassah, and they had bananas. And Maggie and I, we snarfed bananas you wouldn't believe, because we hadn't seen fruit in Britain for years, because Britain is a northern country and dependent on fruit from every place else in the world. It's an island. So that was part of our severe rationing, no fruit. So I remember gouging on bananas and then arriving in New York and arriving at Penn Station in New York and taking the subway for the first time from Penn Station to my aunt's apartment in Jamaica, and I thought the subway was the most luxurious transportation ever. That much I remember. come Friday, Maggie will remember much more. Her memory is much clearer than mine.
Oh, she was a year older.
Yes, she was
Yeah.
older.
Okay, next question. Could you tell us a bit more about your mother's life once she got to the United States, and what was the adjustment like for her?
Well, it wasn't easy. She went to work immediately in the garment center as a sewing machine operator. Maggie, who was turning 16, went to work daytime in a dentist's office and went to night school. And I went to day school and took all kinds of night jobs. Mama worked her way up to become forelady in the garment factory, but was frequently ill, and I think a very stressed life. Think about 6 years in England. We were reunited as a family on the train leaving England. Okay. But I can tell you that her best years were 10 years, her last 10 years in Dallas. We got her an apartment, we got her a credit card, she became active at the JCC. Her English improved a little bit, but not much, but her handwriting got much worse. But she was very active in the senior citizens activities at the JCC, and they made her recording secretary. And she lived long enough to see all 5 grandchildren.
That's wonderful. Okay, next question. Did you ever go back to visit the family that you stayed with there, that sheltered you? And did you ever go back to your hometown?
We did, and I took Terry back with me. We did not connect with the family in Coventry because they were older, but we did go back to the family in Hartford, and I actually sent checks for Mr. and Mrs. Pettit's headstones, and we visited their graves on a visit to London and took our kids. Yes, we did.
Okay. Bert, did you ever reunite with any of your extended family or friends? What happened to them?
Yes, we did. One very good reunion. We reunited with 4 first cousins, 4 women who were the daughters of my father's next youngest brother. And we reunited with them when I was in my 60s, and they lived in Germany. And we're still in touch with some of them, but not very many others. Okay.
Okay, final question before we wrap up. You were a refugee as a child. Do you think that your experiences affected your children?
Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. They do talk about it a lot. They think about it a lot. Can I end with one quotation? Mm-hmm. And when I talk to school children, I talk about refugees, and I give them a little bit of English instruction and the word refugee. And refugees comes from the refuge. And in Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, you have 3 definitions for refuge: shelter or protection from danger or distress. 2, a place that provides shelter. 3, a person or persons or places providing safety, comfort, or security. And then I went to Roget's Thesaurus to get a synonym for refuge. And they have several of them. Refuge means asylum, cover, escape, protection, home, harbor, sanctuary, security, shelter, safe place, or shield. And then I also close with telling them this. Your Bible, my Bible, has, and many other religious tomes have scripts giving instructions how to treat a stranger, a refugee. And the one that I picked out was from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33 and 34. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. Leviticus chapter 33. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. If you're planning on visiting the rest of the museum and have not gotten your tickets, please visit the front desk team on your way out the theater doors. And I'd like to invite you to join us for the rest of this spring break week. Tomorrow we will feature Hannah Schraub, who will share her family's story of survival in the Westerbork transit camp, amongst others. On Thursday, Dr. Andres Laco will share his story of survival, and on Friday, Bert's sister Maggie will tell her experiences at the same time that Bert was going through his experiences. They had different experiences, particularly once they arrived in England. And thank you all so much for joining us today. If you want to talk to Mr. Bert, he will be available, and you are welcome to come up and speak with him.